The hall was filled with the soft glow of golden lights, the scent of fresh flowers, and the sound of balloons brushing against each other as they floated above the tables. Yet despite all the beauty and effort, the room felt empty, like a grand stage without its audience, and sitting at the center of it all was a little girl in a wheelchair, her dark hair neatly brushed and a bright birthday dress chosen especially for her 7th birthday. But the smile on her lips had already started to fade as she noticed the row of chairs lined up across the hall remained vacant, and the gifts piled high beside her stood untouched, wrapped perfectly but looking lonelier than she was, because not a single child from her class, not even one neighbor or family friend, had come to celebrate, and the silence echoed louder than music ever could, pressing down on her fragile heart. She had spent days waiting for this moment, talking to her father about the cake she wanted, the games she hoped to play, the laughter she longed to hear. And although her father, a powerful CEO, had done everything to make the day magical, hiring decorators, planning surprises, and arranging a feast, the one thing he could not control was the people who chose not to come, for they whispered quietly about her condition, about how the once active little girl who loved to dance and run now sat unable to move her legs, after the accident that had changed everything, and in their whispers they avoided her, leaving her to carry the burden of loneliness even at an age when she should have been carefree. The father stood by the side of the room, his sharp suit and polished shoes betraying none of his inner turmoil, but inside he was breaking, because he could buy skyscrapers, sign contracts worth millions, and change the course of businesses. Yet he could not bring even one child to share his daughter's birthday, and every time he saw her trying to keep her smile alive, his heart cracked a little more, for he had promised himself after her accident that he would protect her from pain. But this was a kind of pain his wealth could not shield her from, and the longer the clock ticked, the heavier the silence became, so heavy that even the birthday candles flickered timidly as though ashamed of burning for no one. And when the moment finally came for the cake to be cut, the girl's small hands trembled on the table where the knife was placed, and she looked up at her father with eyes that begged for something he could not give, asking quietly, "Is anyone coming, Papa?" And though he tried to smile, tried to say that perhaps they were running late, the truth rang inside him like a cold bell, and he could not lie to himself anymore. No one was coming, not a single guest, and his daughter would blow out the candles, alone, with only his clapping hands and the echo of her own voice to fill the emptiness. But, just as she closed her eyes and leaned forward to make her wish, a sound came from the doorway, a small hesitant sound that neither of them expected, the faint scrape of sneakers on the polished floor and the quiet clearing of a throat. And both father and daughter turned their heads, their hearts caught between hope and disbelief, because standing at the edge of the hall was a little boy, dressed simply in clothes that were a little too worn and shoes that had clearly been through too many walks, holding in his small hands a crookedly folded card made from plain paper. And though he looked uncertain, his voice was clear as he asked softly, "Can I come in?" And in that single question, the air of the hall shifted, the silence broke. And though the father froze in surprise, the girl's face lit up with more joy than all the decorations and gifts in the room combined. For someone had come. Someone had chosen to see her not as a burden or a shadow of who she once was, but simply as a little girl celebrating her birthday. And though the father did not yet understand the weight of what was beginning, he knew in that moment that this unexpected guest had changed everything. The father's breath caught in his throat as he watched the boy step hesitantly into the grand hall, the sound of his small sneakers tapping against the marble floor echoing louder than the music that had been playing faintly in the background. And though everything about the party had been planned for weeks with precision, the towering cake, the polished cutlery, the glowing lights, nothing had prepared the millionaire CEO for the sight of a stranger's child walking toward his daughter with such quiet bravery, holding nothing more than a handmade card that seemed fragile against the weight of the room's emptiness. And in that moment, the girl's wide eyes, shining with a mixture of disbelief and hope, followed the boy as if she were afraid he might vanish if she blinked. But he did not vanish. Instead, he walked closer, stopping just in front of her wheelchair and smiling awkwardly as he said in a voice too soft yet steady enough to pierce through the heavy silence, "I didn't get an invitation, but I heard it was your birthday. Can I stay?" And though the father's instinct was to question, to demand where this boy had come from, who his parents were, and how he had entered his home unannounced, he saw his daughter's hands tremble as she reached for the card, her lips parting in a gasp that carried more joy than anything he had seen in months, and he could not bring himself to stop it, for this small act, simple as it seemed, was like a spark of light in the shadows of her loneliness. And the boy, noticing her joy, relaxed enough to laugh nervously, rubbing the back of his neck before adding, "I didn't bring a gift. I couldn't, but I made this," pushing the folded card gently into her lap, where her tiny fingers opened it to reveal a shaky but colorful drawing of a cake with candles and the words written in uneven letters, "Happy birthday, princess." And though the lines were imperfect and the paper was crinkled, her eyes filled with tears, because to her it was more precious than all the expensive gifts stacked beside her untouched. And she looked up at her father, with such pure happiness that his chest tightened with both relief and shame, relief that someone had given her what he could not, and shame that despite his wealth and power, it took a boy from outside his world to make his daughter truly smile on her birthday. Yet beneath that smile lay questions. Who was this boy? Where had he come from? And why had he walked alone into a place where no other dared to command? As the father stood watching, torn between gratitude and suspicion, the boy pulled out a chair beside the girl, sat down without fear, and began to talk to her about ordinary things like favorite colors, cartoons, and silly jokes. And with every word, her laughter rang out, filling the hollow hall with a warmth that decorations had failed to create. And for the first time since the accident, her laughter felt unbroken, unforced, alive. And the father, standing silently, realized that the boy's presence had done something unthinkable. He had turned what was supposed to be the saddest day into the beginning of something new. Yet the father could not silence the unease whispering in his mind, because things like this did not happen without reason. And though he wanted to believe it was nothing more than a miracle of kindness, a part of him wondered if there was more to this unexpected guest than met the eye. For the boy carried himself with a courage that seemed too deep for his age, and behind his smile there lingered something unspoken, a quiet strength that suggested his story was not ordinary. And as the candles flickered and the cake remained waiting, the father knew this boy's arrival was no accident. It was the start of a truth waiting to be revealed, a truth that would test them all. The girl could not stop staring at the boy, her small fingers brushing again and again over the uneven letters of the card as though it was the most beautiful thing she had ever touched. And while the decorations sparkled and the candles on the cake waited to be lit, nothing in that room shone brighter than the joy spreading across her pale face. For she had not smiled so wide since the day of her accident, and her father, standing behind her wheelchair, felt his throat tighten as if he was seeing his daughter reborn in front of him. Yet he could not ignore the strange sense of wonder that clung to the moment, because no one had managed to bring this kind of happiness to her. Not doctors, not therapists, not even himself. And now here was a boy, just a boy, doing what money and power could not. But as the girl lifted her eyes to the boy, she whispered in a trembling voice, "Will you stay with me?" And those words carried such weight that the father felt them sink deep into his chest. For he knew how badly she craved companionship and how desperately she wanted to feel like any other child with friends who cared. And the boy, without hesitation, nodded and grinned, saying, "Of course, I'll stay, because no one should ever be alone on their birthday." And he reached across the table to take her hand gently, not caring about the wires of her chair or the weakness in her grip, and she squeezed his hand as tightly as she could, a squeeze that was small yet filled with more life than she had shown in months. And the father, though wary, could not deny the miracle unfolding before his eyes. So when the boy asked if he could help her blow out the candles, the father only nodded, and together they leaned forward, the girl closing her eyes to make a wish while the boy whispered, "Don't forget to believe in it." And the flames went out in one soft breath that seemed to carry away the sadness of the past, replacing it with laughter as the boy clapped and cheered as though it were the grandest celebration in the world. And though there were no other guests to join, his energy filled the emptiness, transforming the cold hall into a place of warmth. But what truly startled the father was when the boy pulled from his pocket not another drawing but a small, folded paper crane, carefully made, its wings uneven yet graceful, and he handed it to the girl with a shy smile, saying, "This is for when you feel scared, because if you keep it close, you'll remember that you're not alone." And the girl held it as though it were made of gold, her eyes shining with unshed tears as she whispered, "It's the best gift ever." And her father turned his face away, afraid she would see the moisture in his own eyes, for he could not understand how a stranger's son had managed to touch his daughter's heart so deeply. But in that moment, he also saw the truth that joy did not come from wealth or grand gestures. It came from human connection, from the small acts of kindness that carried more weight than diamonds. And as the girl laughed and talked with the boy, showing him her favorite dolls and sharing her secret dreams of walking again, the father stood silently, listening, realizing that the boy was giving his daughter not just company but something far greater, the gift of joy, the one thing he himself had not been able to restore in her life. Yet deep within him, questions still stirred, for the boy's presence felt almost too perfect, too timely, as if fate itself had chosen this day. And though the father wanted to believe it was nothing but a chance encounter, he could not shake the feeling that there was more to this boy's story than anyone knew. And as the evening stretched on, the laughter echoing through the once empty halls, the father understood that whatever truth lay hidden, it had already begun to change them forever. The father stood in the corner of the decorated hall, his eyes fixed on the sight before him, his daughter laughing freely as she clutched the small paper crane the boy had given her, her cheeks glowing with a happiness he thought he would never see again. And in that moment, he felt his carefully built walls of strength beginning to tremble, because for months, he had tried everything: therapists, specialists from around the world, yet none of them had managed to give his daughter what this boy, a stranger with nothing but innocence, had offered in only a few hours, and though the father had always believed that money could solve any problem, he realized now how powerless it was against loneliness, how useless it was in the face of a child's need for love, and his heart ached as he remembered all the nights his daughter had cried herself to sleep, whispering for her mother who was no longer there, while he drowned himself in work and meetings, telling himself that he was doing it for her. But now he saw the truth, that she had not wanted riches or gifts. She had only wanted someone to hold her hand, someone to remind her she was not forgotten. And as the boy leaned closer to whisper something that made her laugh even harder, the father found himself studying him with growing curiosity, noticing the old shoes on his feet, the worn jacket that hung loosely on his shoulders, and he wondered where this child had come from and why he had chosen to step into their lives at such a broken time. For he had not arrived with cameras or intentions, only with honesty in his smile. And yet, the father could not shake the feeling that the boy's presence carried a deeper purpose, something that fate had carefully written. And as his daughter lifted her crane high and declared it her lucky bird, he realized that this moment was not an accident but perhaps a reminder, a calling to him as a father, to see what truly mattered. And while part of him feared the pain of opening his heart again, another part whispered that if a little boy could bring such light into their darkness, maybe it was time for him to stop hiding behind his grief, to stop believing he could heal his daughter by building walls of wealth, and instead embrace the simple truth that love, in its purest form, was the cure she had been waiting for. And as he took a slow step forward, watching them share cake and stories as if they had known each other all their lives, he realized that the boy had not just given his daughter joy, he had given him a chance to remember how to be a father. Again, the morning after the strange birthday that had begun with silence and ended in laughter, the mansion seemed different, as though the heavy air of grief that had lingered for years had suddenly lifted, and the father, who had spent so long in shadowed hallways filled with the quiet hum of loneliness, now woke to the sound of his daughter's voice echoing faintly from her room, her giggles blending with the higher, brighter laughter of the boy. And for a moment he sat still in his bed, wondering if it was all a dream. But when he opened the door and walked down the corridor, he saw the impossible truth. His paralyzed daughter, usually curled in her chair, was leaning forward, clapping her hands while the boy balanced a stack of playing cards on the table. And though her legs still did not move, her spirit was alive in a way he had never seen before. And something inside the father shifted, something he could not quite explain, a blend of hope and fear, for he had been taught by life that miracles did not come easy. Yet here was one growing in front of his eyes. Not in the form of sudden healing, but in the form of a bond so strong it made the impossible seem possible. And he stood quietly, remembering the countless nights he had begged the world for a sign, for something to tell him his daughter would not be lost forever. And now he realized that perhaps the sign was not in doctors or cures, but in this unexpected friendship. This boy who had entered their lives with nothing but kindness and had given more than money ever could. And as he stepped closer, he noticed the boy's jacket draped across the chair, the fabric frayed and the color faded, and he felt a pang in his chest, because it was clear the boy came from a world far different from theirs, a world of struggle and need. And yet, instead of asking for help, he had offered it freely. And the father, who had once believed he had everything, suddenly saw how poor he had been in the things that truly mattered. And when his daughter saw him and called out, "Daddy, look, he's teaching me a game," he felt tears rise unbidden, for she had not spoken to him with such joy in years. And he realized that love, shared in its purest form, could move mountains that even wealth could not touch. And in that moment he made a decision, one that frightened him and comforted him all at once, that this boy was not just a guest at a party, not just a fleeting miracle, but perhaps the beginning of something new, a chapter where broken hearts could find healing together. And as he walked forward, placing his hand gently on his daughter's shoulder and smiling at the boy, he said words he had not spoken in a long time, words that felt heavy with promise and light with hope. "How would you like to stay for breakfast?" And though it was a small gesture, it was also the opening of a door he had kept shut for far too long. And as the boy's eyes lit up with surprise and gratitude, the father knew this was no longer about an empty birthday. It was about a future waiting to be written, a future where loneliness would be replaced with laughter, and grief with companionship. And as the sun streamed through the windows, painting the room in gold, he felt, for the first time in years, that they were stepping not into another day of sorrow but into a new beginning, one shaped not by loss but by the courage of a child who dared to ask, "Can I?" Changed everything forever.